Our next session, we need to be considered about climate change. It's a global priority and our own speciality can contribute too. So welcome to the first of our industry-sponsored symposia brought to us by Medclaire. Please visit their exhibition page to learn more about their work and products. This session will be chaired by my OAA colleague Fiona Pearson, who has been the trainee representative on the OAA Executive Committee and is now a consultant at the James Cook Hospital in Middlesbrough. Fiona has had a long-standing interest in how to reduce the environmental impact of anaesthesia and is a member of the UK Maternity Carbon Emissions Working Group. So I cannot think of a better person to chair this symposium than Fiona. So over to you, Fiona.
Hello and welcome to the OAA Industry Symposium supported by Medclaire. I'm really grateful to have been asked to chair this session. Environmental sustainability is a topic that's something very topical and something that I'm passionate about. While you're hopefully enjoying some lunch, or if you're joining us from Australia, perhaps a midnight snack, I'll start by giving a basic introduction into the topic, and we're then going to hear from Chris Allen and Maleen Hegenberger about the work that they're doing in this area. If you have any questions, please submit them on the system and we'll have some time to answer them at the end. The climate emergency is a global health emergency. Rising temperatures result in extremes of weather, rising sea levels, and impact on water and food supplies. Between 2030 to 2050, climate change is expected to cause 250,000 additional deaths per year from malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. Not everyone is equally at risk, with children, the elderly, and economically disadvantaged groups being particularly vulnerable. The Paris Agreement set out a global framework to mitigate climate change by limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees, preferably within 1.5 degrees. The NHS has set out its plan to deliver a net zero NHS by 2040. And that means reducing emissions we control directly, referred to as the NHS carbon footprint, by over 6 megatons. As anaesthetic gases make up 2% of the NHS carbon footprint, the net zero plan discusses transforming anaesthetic practice to reduce the carbon footprint of anaesthetic services by 40%. So why are we looking at labour analgesia? The Sustainable Development Unit calculated that in 2017, the carbon footprint from anaesthetic services amounted to 525,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents. Of that, 30% came from nitrous oxide use in maternity services, amounting to 157,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents. Last year, Kathy Lawson, Kirsty McLennan and I conducted an OAA survey to assess the use of anaesthetic gases by OAA members. The survey link was emailed out to our members and asked questions about the use of nitrous oxide and scavenging in both obstetric theatres and delivery rooms. The email invitation was opened by over 1,000 members and we received 412 completed responses. Looking at the use of nitrous oxide for analgesia in obstetric theatres, 70% of respondents said that they occasionally give nitrous oxide for analgesia. This may be either as a bridging analgesic while they're inserting a neuraxial block, or for additional analgesia if the patient experiences any discomfort during delivery. Of these, 86% source it from the anaesthetic machine. This is a potential problem. As it will only be used during inspiration, the majority of that nitrous oxide will be wasted. If you assume nitrous oxide has a global warming potential of 265, and you were delivering a 50-50 blend of nitrous oxide and oxygen for 5 minutes, it's 6 litres a minute, your carbon dioxide equivalents of that wasted nitrous oxide would be about the same as driving 40 kilometres in a car. There's also been incidents where a vaporizer has accidentally been left on, resulting in the woman receiving an anaesthetic as opposed to just the nitrous oxide that you were hoping to give. It's therefore safer and more efficient to deliver that nitrous oxide and oxygen via an Entonox cylinder with a demand valve. When we look at how nitrous oxide is delivered in delivery rooms, the majority is delivered via a pipeline with a demand valve. However, 83% of those that responded said they had no scavenging available in their delivery rooms. We know that nitrous oxide exposure is associated with health risks for staff. Studies have shown that environmental levels of nitrous oxide in delivery rooms frequently exceed the COSH standards. Scavenging in delivery rooms has been proven to significantly reduce nitrous oxide exposure, so it's disappointing to see that the majority of people still do not have this present. So what is the environmental impact of nitrous oxide for labour analgesia? The global warming potential of nitrous oxide, as I've already mentioned, is 265. So that means it traps 265 times more heat than carbon dioxide. As a labouring woman has a very high minute ventilation, this means that for every minute they use Entonox in labour, they're producing 3 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalents for every minute, and that's equivalent to driving about 17 kilometres in the average car. Or for us anaesthetists, it's about a 3-hour anaesthetic with low-flow sevoflurane per minute that nitrous oxide is used. How does this compare to other labour analgesics? So if you imagine a woman having a 4-hour period of labour analgesia, and assume that they'd be breathing nitrous oxide and oxygen intermittently, if they were contracting 3 and 10 and using the nitrous oxide for about 1 minute per contraction, you can see here that there's a huge difference between the environmental impact of that nitrous oxide versus other potential labour analgesics. Now, undoubtedly, there are things we can do to reduce the carbon footprint of other labour analgesics. For example, we could rationalise our epidural packs, removing the gallipots. You could choose to use a reusable sterile gown for inserting your epidural, which would have a lower carbon footprint. You could use the appropriate waste stream for the waste that you produce when you're using these other labour analgesics. But there's no denying when you look at this graph that you can see why the main focus is currently on nitrous oxide. And that's not the whole story. So work by Alethea Chikera, who's a pharmacist in NHS Lothian, has shown that hundreds of litres of nitrous oxide and Entonox are wasted. This can be due to poor manifold management. So for example, if your manifold pressure threshold is set too high, it would result in a lot of either nitrous oxide or Entonox being left in the cylinder, which is therefore returned back to BOC in the UK and is vented to the atmosphere. We also have problems with cylinders going out of date. And again, that's just returned to the supplier and is vented to the atmosphere, as well as leaks at Schrader valves and in pipework of hospitals. So how can we reduce the impact of nitrous oxide for labour analgesia? First of all, we should look at reducing waste. Check for manifold and pipework leaks, rationalise the manifold pressure thresholds, and administer it via demand valve wherever possible. We need to think about using it judiciously. Nitrous oxide is a very important labour analgesic. It improves maternal satisfaction, and it's one of the few labour analgesics that's available in all birth settings. But we do need to give patient and staff education about its environmental impact. Ideally, use it for the shortest time possible, and consider or offer alternatives. For example, if a lady is asking for a labour epidural, it would be important to try and offer this early to try and reduce the impact of the additional Entonox that may be used. And lastly, we move on to scavenging and catalytic conversion of nitrous oxide. So this is specifically mentioned in the NHS Net Zero plan. Implementing capture and destruction of nitrous oxide could save 90 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalents. And you can see there in the light blue section of the pathway to net zero that it specifically mentions nitrous oxide capture and reuse. Which brings us on nicely to our next speaker. So I'd like to introduce Chris Allen. Chris is an anaesthetics and intensive care medicine trainee who's currently undertaking the fellowship in environmentally sustainable anaesthesia with the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare and the Association of Anaesthetists in Newcastle upon Tyne.
Great. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you for your presentation talking about nitrous oxide. So what I'm going to do now is just talk a little bit about what projects we're running in Newcastle looking at nitrous oxide and how we can reduce our overall use. So I'm just going to set the scene with a bit about the situation in Newcastle maternity and our sort of current nitrous oxide use, and then talk about what plans we have going forwards. So Newcastle is quite forward-thinking in its sustainability goals. It's the first organisation, Newcastle Hospitals, to declare a climate emergency back in June 2019, and sort of alluded to the NHS's plans to be carbon neutral from direct emissions by 2040. Newcastle has gone a bit further and aimed to do that by 2030, along with looking at the supply chain, transport links, and looking at that sort of reusable, recyclable sort of elements of all the equipment that we use. So there's a lot going on in Newcastle, and one of the things I've focused on in my fellowship has been nitrous oxide. Part of that, as Fiona said, has been about nitrous oxide systems loss with Alethea Shakir, looking at manifold waste. And another part of that has been with this project looking at nitrous oxide cracking, and that's been set up currently at the Royal Victoria Infirmary Maternity Unit. Just to put that into a bit of context, it's quite a large unit, 6,500 to 7,000 births per year, 1,500 at the 10-bed birthing centre, just the midwife-led one, and then the rest on the delivery suite, which has 12 dedicated birthing rooms. It's a large centre, sort of tertiary centre, so we hope that, you know, if things work here, then hopefully most of you listening can sort of see it working in your own units as well, which would be great. Now, part of my work throughout the year has just been looking at how much nitrous oxide we as a trust and also as a country use. And if we take sort of pure nitrous oxide out of the equation and just focus on Entonox, I use Entonox as a sort of, I know it's a brand name, but essentially sort of a mix of oxygen, nitrous oxide. We use, or we purchase at Newcastle about 4 million litres of Entonox per year on average. Which, you know, when you look at it in terms of CO2 equivalent, it's about 2,000 tonnes of CO2. And then if you sort of want to look at that in a more sort of meaningful way, if you think about the, say, 7,000 or so women who deliver at the RVI, they would, to generate that same amount of CO2, they would have to drive about 1,000 kilometres there and back again to the RVI to give birth to generate that same amount of CO2. So it's quite a significant amount of Entonox that we use at Newcastle, and I know that we're one of the higher users across the country, but I'm sure the picture is quite similar at a lot of places. And as Fiona has already said, once the nitrous oxide has been used, it's been exhaled, it's going to go on and cause quite significant damage to the atmosphere, not just due to its global warming potential, but also it depletes the ozone layer, and the lifespan of nitrous oxide, once it's in the atmosphere, is over 100 years, so it will have that effect for quite a long period of time. So, you know, what do we want to do at Newcastle? And I think hopefully a lot of you are thinking similar things at your own units, is that basically, you know, fundamentally we want to continue offering Entonox, so nitrous oxide oxygen, as a safe, effective form of analgesia for labouring women. But we want to use that responsibly. So we want to understand how much we're actually using for patients, how much we're exposing staff to, and then think about how can we stop that amount being released into the atmosphere to cause climate damage. So how have we gone about achieving this? Well, we approached Medclare and talked to them about the different devices that they used. We'd heard, I think they'd done some good work with the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare. There's an article on their website about just sort of general attitudes towards nitrous oxide in Scandinavia, and that sort of started the ball rolling about, well, how does it actually work in those countries, and then thinking about, well, how can that be applied to the NHS? So, as with many things, assembling a sort of a wide-ranging team was key. So we started talking with obstetricians, midwives, anaesthetists on the labour suite, the sustainability team at Newcastle, and then the medical engineers and the facilities and the estates engineers, and all sort of together came up with a sort of plan as to how we can implement some of the things that Medclare are offering. And we wanted to do it in a sort of correct, for want of a better word, way. So we talked to the Academic Health Sciences Network for the region, who have helped set up the project and design it in such a way that hopefully it will be applicable to a lot of other units as well, and we'll get answer some questions in a sort of sensible and scientific way. And then we've linked in with the Regional Integrated Care Systems Sustainability Group. And for those of you who don't know, that they're sort of groups across the country looking at sort of different goals within sustainability for hospital and GPs to try and achieve. And one of those is looking at anaesthetic gases, specifically nitrous oxide. So they were very interested to hear about what we've been up to. And I think one of the key things is engaging with the service users, so that the labouring women. So we're using the RVI have got a Maternity Voices partnership, which is where they can sort of engage with women who are either going to use the service or have used the service, and it's a way of sort of feeding back. So we're hoping to engage with them and plan the project with patients at the very centre. So what are we looking to do? Well, initially when we spoke to Medclare, and again, as Fiona said, from the OAA survey, a lot of the places across the country don't have scavenging, and some Medclare solutions do involve the scavenging system to make them work. So we initially thought, well, fine, we probably don't have scavenging, but let's look at the mobile units. And those are sort of self-contained units that would sit by the bed space and allow Etanox to be delivered and then collected and broken down through catalytic process. But then what we did, which I would encourage all of you to do for your own units, if you are thinking about some sort of solution similar to this, is to actually go and have a look around. And we did that with members of the anaesthetic team and the obstetric and midwifery teams, and we discovered that there was actually an anaesthetic gas scavenging system in each of the rooms, which no one had sort of necessarily twigged, which was good news in the sense that it meant we could explore using what's called a central destruction unit, and that's something that kind of lives behind the wall, so to speak, on the other end of the gas scavenging system in some sort of plant room, and we'll collect gases through that scavenging system and crack them that way. And that's quite an efficient way of using it. So that's our plan at the moment, is to use the central destruction unit on the delivery suite, and we're hoping that will work very well for us. In the downstairs birthing centre, that doesn't have scavenging, but the rooms are quite large, and they will hopefully lend themselves quite well to using some of the smaller self-contained mobile units. I think one of the key questions we had when we were first trying to set up this technology is, what's the interface like between the technology and the women wanting to use it? What is it going to have to change? The mouthpiece, the setup, is it going to be something that's going to be really significantly different to experience as a labouring woman? But we're reassured that it's able to use through mouthpieces, which is great. I know that in Scandinavia most of the time it's used through a face mask, but I think that's more of a cultural choice. But we can use the mouthpieces that we're using at the Newcastle at the moment, which is great. And as an extra sort of thing to look at staff exposure, Medclare have produced a nitrous oxide detector, not too dissimilar to what you might wear if you work in X-ray or IR a lot. It can sort of sense nitrous oxide levels. So we're going to hopefully incorporate that into our project to look at staff levels as well. So that's what we're doing. We want to understand what it's going to be like for women in staff. We are hoping that it's going to be very similar and it's not going to have too much impact on patients wanting to use Entonox if they want to use it, and shouldn't interrupt or come into sort of any kind of conflict with providing excellent care. I think the main thing that we're going to look at is how we're going to capture it when patients are exhaling. Obviously, most of the time, if you're using a mouthpiece, I think labouring women would tend to sort of take the mouthpiece away and exhale into the room. There's going to be a slight change in the technique to try and get labouring women to exhale into the mouthpiece for the first, ideally 20 to 30 seconds after using it, to try and collect as much nitrous oxide as possible. And we're just going to have to see how that sort of slight shift works. So as I've said, we're going to look at the user experience, staff experience. We're going to look at current levels of nitrous oxide and then see what the difference is once we've got these units installed, and then to try and quantify the impact on both staff exposure and on the climate using the technology we've got. And finally, we're hoping that this will take us into a much better position, really, that we aim to be the first unit in the UK to have such a comprehensive system in place where anyone wanting to use Entonox at the RVR will be using it in a way that allows for nitrous oxide cracking. This will obviously move us close to both the Trusts and the NHS's sustainability goals, and we're hoping that it will inform other units as to whether this can be a solution for them as well. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to some questions at the end. If anyone's got any questions later on, please do feel free to contact me, and I'll happily chat through the project in a bit more detail. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. It's great to see Newcastle leading the way in introducing these technologies to the UK. Our next speaker is Maleen Hegenberger. She trained as a registered nurse in Denmark and as a midwife in Norway. She's familiar with using nitrous oxide capture and conversion techniques in her work. Although she is not from the UK, she is currently in London on quarantine, having come over to promote her new speculum that she's designed. So over to you, Maleen.
Thank you very much for having me. Let me see if I can get my slide going here. Is my slide? Yes. Well, thank you for your introduction. I'm currently living and working in Denmark as a midwife. I have a broad international experience as a nurse and a midwife. I worked in the Caribbean and Norway and the US and the UK actually. And I've always had a keen interest in how we can get these women through labor delivery in a really safe and content way with a healthy baby in the other end leaving the hospital. So it's a true passion of mine to find new ways how we can solve different problems. And besides, I'm working as a basic floor midwife at my local hospital, but I'm also the CEO and the inventor of the Hegenberger speculum. So that also takes a lot of my time when I'm traveling and promoting that new device. So the hospital I work in is in Slagelse Hospital in Denmark. It's a medium-sized hospital, and it's quite new actually. The part I'm in, it was built in 2018, and we moved in there. So we have really lovely big delivery suites. We have 5 of them, and we have about 2,000 deliveries a year in my unit. And we use the gas and air a lot. It's about 50 to 60% of all babies are being delivered where we use the nitrous oxide as part of the pain management of the women. And the women in Denmark, I think I can almost speak on behalf of the Scandinavian countries, they really tend to use it a lot, and they are asking for it when they come in. It's very typical part of their birth plan to use it. And it's a midwifery department I'm on, and we use it, as I said before, in most of the countries in Scandinavia. And we have both the blenders and we have the pre-mixed gases. We are allowed in Denmark to use 50 to 50%. I think that's standard in many places, but usually we tend to start a little lower and then we work our way up. And we have it's under we are managing the nitrous oxide under the guidelines of the Danish Obstetric Society, so we are below the the Obstetric Society in our use. And it's very important for the Danish midwives that we work in a safe environment, that we know that the air we breathe in the room is clean. So we do work a lot with the closed systems, so that it's mandatory that we turn on the suction for the gas, and we inform the patient how to use the gas and air before we start using it. Here you have two pictures, with one with a mobile unit, and the other one is connected to the wall. And when it comes to clinical work, there's a lot to be said for habits. You know, if you're getting used to something, then that's your habit, and that's what you go to. And for me, it's a completely normal part of the day to connect the gas and air to the wall. Or it is connected, but to turn on the suction and to turn on the gas and air, so that I know that the air I'm working with the patient, that the air that I breathe when she's in labor is as clean as possible, and that we have a good ventilation system. Most Danish women, they tend to like the face mask, prefer over the mouthpiece, and that's because the way they breathe out is so heavily, so they feel like they have to hold on to the mouthpiece, and they can't relax in their jaws. So a lot of them tend to like the mask. But if they get claustrophobic, it's nice to have the other option, the mouthpiece. But I think 9 out of 10 would use the face mask anytime. Also, if they have loud noises or during labor, they feel like they can kind of control it a little in the face mask. And as I said before, it's always a closed system, which makes me feel really nice. There's a valve in the tubes that makes the gas only be pulled out, or only when the woman is breathing in. So it's not lying there and getting into the environment that I'm in as well. So here's a picture of how it is in my department. You see the exhale gas go into the wall, and that's what you click on, and you can hear the suction, and that's a good sign that it's working. And I have no knowledge of the technical part of this, where the gas goes, and this knowledge here is about the impact on the environment is very new to me. And I must say it's something that is close to my heart, and I'm going to talk a lot more about this, because I have absolutely no knowledge that this had such a huge impact on the environment. And I think I'm not alone. I don't think many people know the CO2 impact that we have in the hospital when it comes to using gas and air. Especially a lot of my colleagues are very environmentally oriented, and I don't think this one has reached us yet, but I'm certainly going to speak a lot more about this at home. But you see the different valves here, and it's nice that it can be removed from me. The air I breathe is as clean as possible. I need to focus on 2 patients. I have the mom and the baby, and I need to be alert at all times a day. We work 12-hour days, 12-hour shifts, so sometimes it's long hours, long days with the patient. And if there's a red flag in the labor, if something diverges from the normal progress, we need to be ready to step in and take action. So it's very important. And I'm certainly going to speak a lot more about the environmental impact that this has. And I would love for it to be addressed in my hospital, that we kind of look at the numbers and how we in collaboration with Medcare, how we can address this issue. So I think that was all from me, from the Scandinavian midwife. I don't know if we go back to you, Fiona, for questions and answers.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Maleen. So that's quite interesting. It sounds like the rationale for introducing it in your hospital wasn't from an environmental perspective then? Was it more from a staff safety perspective?
It was for the occupational exposure. There hasn't been any research done in Denmark, as far as I know, but there has been some research done in Norway back in 2010 to 2014, and I was actually a midwifery student when they did those, and they were No, that I was not, sorry, but it was back in 2010 to 2014. They were measuring the I don't know if you say free gas in the labor room for the staff, and that made a lot of the hospitals in Norway turn off or stop using the gas and air. And then it came back a couple of years ago, and the same in my hospital, it came back, but then it was with a closed system. And I know that some colleagues, they have, headaches, and they've been tired, and I don't know what is what, but still to know that you're working in a environment that is as clean as possible with at least, the least amount of free gas is a very good feeling when you're going to be there for that many hours.
Yeah, definitely. So, Chris, I got the impression from you that exposure levels in staff is not something that's currently measured at Newcastle.
Yes, that's right. As far as I know, we've not sort of quantified it at the moment. And I suspect that's probably true for most units, that they don't routinely measure circulating levels of nitrous oxide.
Yeah, that's certainly something that I've found in the hospitals that I've been around. I've never known it to be measured. It sounds like that might be something that happens more in Scandinavia from what Maleen was saying. Quite positive to hear. And so the central destruction unit, Chris, you mentioned you'd have a central destruction unit for the rooms that you've got scavenging in, and then a mobile destruction unit for the birthing centre. So would that be a mobile destruction unit for every single room? What's the intention there?
Well, what we did was we talked to the midwives who run the unit, the sort of midwifery-led unit, and worked out that on average they would have 3 to 4 labouring women at any one time during a 24-hour period. Even though they've got more rooms, what we decided was that probably 4 mobile units would be sufficient to meet the demand of that sort of space pretty much, with the odd exception. So that was a plan, to rather than fill each room with a mobile unit, is to take advantage of its mobility and just have 4, and then they could be moved into whichever room was needed at the time.
We've had a question that many of our parturients would like to avoid using nitrous oxide for labour analgesia and opt for early epidural. However, they don't want to be confined to bed with the early epidural. Would this be a reason to introduce mobile epidurals? Maleen, is epidurals an option in the unit that you're in, or is it a midwife-led unit?
It is a midwife-led unit. I think it's a little different in Denmark. The departments are run by midwives, and then of course we have a very good collaboration with the doctors. But if you come in and you have a normal pregnancy, then all you see is a midwife. And yes, but we do have epidural, and we are authorized to ask for an epidural for the women without calling the doctor for prima gravidas if everything is normal. And so we do use epidural, and but we also we have a lot of birth plans where they go through the different analgesia options that the women have. So if epidural is a strong wish, we tend to go quite fast to that option. We don't go through all the different steps like hot tub and shower and then gas and air, and then we kind of go straight, which I think is in the interest of the women, that we use it. So, but it's a good thing for multi-para women that comes in quite far in labor, who are 6, 7, 8 centimeters, and you have a feeling, well, she's going to deliver very quickly. Then the gas and air is a very good bridge to kind of get her through until start pushing. But it's the modern women are very informed in Scandinavia. They have their plans and their wishes, and yes, but we do tend to, I think we use it at about 40% of our deliveries. In my unit, I'm not speaking on behalf of whole of Denmark, but in our unit.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, labour epidural is the gold standard of analgesia for labour, but we have to remember that it's not available in all birth settings. And we have NICE guidance that says that nitrous oxide should be available in all birth settings. So it's thinking about how we can keep that as an option for women, but obviously use it in a way that's going to be more environmentally friendly. So somebody was asking just a little bit more detail about what actually happens to the nitrous oxide after it's collected by the scavenging. Chris, are you able to explain what the actual device does?
I think the short answer would be no, but essentially it's my understanding is it's a catalytic process where it's broken down into oxygen, nitrogen, and that is then expelled out of either the bottom of the machine if it's the mobile unit, or via the sort of central unit. That's, I'm afraid, the limit of my understanding of the catalytic process. I don't know exactly what chemicals it sort of involves, but I do know that if you were to introduce, if you're sort of sat there thinking, could that work in theatres, say for pediatrics, for dealing with nitrous oxide, is that if you were to introduce a volatile anaesthetic into the catalytic process, it stops that process working. So this is not a solution that will, as at the moment, will work in theatres. So it will only work with pure nitrous oxide going through it at the moment.
Great. But I gather there are other companies that are working alongside each other to look at devices where you could separate out your volatiles from the nitrous oxide and then separate them that way. Another question, has laminar flow, does that have any role in labour wardrooms? Maleen, do you know anything about that in your delivery suite?
No, sorry. No, I don't. We don't have that.
Yeah, so the Department of Health certainly has standards about air changes in delivery rooms, and I believe it's 15 air changes per hour, which should be happening with the flow of air going from the patient down to the patient's feet and out the room that way. So it certainly does have a role in reducing sort of diluting nitrous oxide in the delivery rooms for staff exposure, but obviously doesn't have any effect on actually the release of nitrous oxide to the atmosphere.
I do know that we have a very good ventilation system, and but I don't know the specific in the ventilation system per se.
We had another question regarding alternatives, which is, would you consider introducing remifentanil and offering this to women as an eco-friendly option? Is that something that's used in Scandinavia at all?
I couldn't say yes yet. I'm not an anesthesiologist. I wouldn't know quite what it is, but no, I wouldn't. As in the epidural, you mean? Is that the question? Or as a systematic use? Yeah,
so remifentanil intravenously with a patient controlling it through a button.
No, we haven't gotten that. I was quite a little bit familiar with it in the US, where it's more controlled, more used, but we haven't reached that level yet in my department, at least. I haven't heard of any departments in Denmark that have started using it.
Chris, is that something that's used at Newcastle hospitals?
It is, but I think rarely, from my limited knowledge of working there. I think they do offer it, but only for cases where an epidural might be either contraindicated or they've been unable to cite one for whatever reason. And I think the take-home message should be that if a unit wants to introduce that, then of course, but I don't think it should be instead of Entonox as a patient choice. I think it should still be something that's Entonox is still something that should be available, and we should also have a system alongside that to use it safely and responsibly.
So there's a really good review article by Mark van der Velde called Remifentanil PCA on the a la carte menu. It's really worth a read. And the summary of that at the end was that, yes, it should be an option, but shouldn't be used routinely. Mainly because there are potential safety implications with remifentanil PCA, and you need a lot more monitoring of the patient, which may not be available due to staffing issues in delivery suites. So it's really important that it's administered safely. And as we say, the thing with nitrous oxide is it can be available in all birth settings, including home birth. So it's definitely something that should be there as an option for women, and it's just about how we can deliver it in an environmentally friendly way. So I think that's pretty much all we've got time for on this session. So I'm going to hand back over to Jim.